No one in the village of Ile-Oba drew on walls anymore. Walls were for silence, for obedience, for forgetting. So when 16-year-old Abeni lifted the charcoal to the clay wall that night, she was not just breaking a rule, she was awakening a crime buried by blood and lies. The charcoal was old, blacker than night, smooth from the hands of many women before her. Her mother had pressed it into her palm on the day she died. "This is not ordinary charcoal," she said, voice trembling as if the earth itself listened. "It has passed from mother to daughter since the day our family was condemned. Promise me you will keep it. Promise me you will never use it in anger." Abeni had promised, but grief is louder than promises. The village had spat at them for years, called them traitors, said their blood was cursed because of a man who once tried to destroy the throne. Abeni's grandfather, or so the story went. That night, as rain beat against the roof and drums sounded faintly in the distance, Abeni pressed the charcoal to the wall. The clay shuddered. She drew a man crowned in shadows. His eyes were not cruel. They were wounded. His hands were not raised in violence. They were clenched in grief. When she finished the face, the hut went silent. Too silent. Then the wall split open with a sound like a cracking bone. The drawing stepped forward. Not as ink, not as ash, but as flesh wrapped in spirit. The air dropped cold. The man looked at her and spoke her name with a voice heavy with centuries. "Abeni, daughter of my blood." Her knees gave way, because the spirit standing before her was not a monster. He was her grandfather, the rightful royal, murdered by his own brother, erased from history, and reborn through the charcoal that carried his vengeance. And outside the hut, the village began to burn. Long before Abeni lifted the charcoal to the wall, her family had suffered because of a man whose name had been erased from history. Oba Adewale, her grandfather. Oba Adewale was the rightful king of Ile-Oba. He ruled with justice, strength, and a love for his people that rivaled the sun. But his younger brother, Oba Temitope, coveted the crown. Temitope feared that his brother's legacy would eclipse his own, so he acted with cunning. One night, Temitope spread a lie. He told the elders and the village that Adewale had secretly conspired with a rival tribe to overthrow the throne and burn the village. According to the false story, Adewale had betrayed his own blood, plotted the death of the chief, and endangered everyone for ambition. The elders believed him. The people feared him. And Adewale's family, his daughters, granddaughters, and sons were cast out as traitors. It wasn't mercy that kept them alive. It was control. Temitope ruled carefully, showing kindness publicly while ensuring the family carried the weight of lies. They could never rise. They could never speak. They could never claim their heritage. Adewale's wife, Abeni's great-grandmother, wept silently while her children were shunned. Stones were thrown at their door. The women were mocked, cursed, and isolated. Every girl born into that bloodline inherited the shame and fear that had nothing to do with her actions. When Abeni's mother was born, she was handed the family's sacred charcoal, a stick forged from funeral ashes and sacred earth, passed from mother to daughter for generations. The charcoal was more than a tool for drawing. It was a vessel of memory, a carrier of truth that no one in the village could hear or see. Her mother grew up under constant ridicule. Villagers whispered that the bloodline was cursed, that they carried the mark of treachery. No one knew the truth. Oba Adewale had done nothing wrong. He had been loyal, protective, and devoted, but the lie was stronger than the truth, and it endured through time. By the time Abeni was born, the whispers had hardened into rules. Never speak of her grandfather, never claim your heritage, never step above your place. And yet, that same bloodline had given her strength, cunning, and the charcoal that would one day awaken her grandfather's spirit. When she drew on the wall, the air in the hut changed. It was as though centuries of injustice had concentrated into a single moment. The village had punished her family for crimes they did not commit. Now, the truth was about to walk out of the wall and reclaim its voice. Outside, the village began to burn. Not by accident, not by fire alone, but by the return of Oba Adewale, carried through the hand of the granddaughter whose blood he had protected even in death. And Abeni realized the lies of Oba Temitope had created centuries of suffering, but now history was turning back, and she could no longer remain a bystander. The night had grown thick and heavy. The moon hid behind clouds, as if it too feared what was coming. Oba Adewale's spirit did not speak. He did not announce himself. He did not beg for understanding. He moved, silent as shadow, powerful as the storm. The village of Ile Oba, so certain of its justice, had no warning. Doors rattled in their frames, roofs shook, trees groaned like creatures in pain. The smoke of countless hearths spiraled upward, mingling with the dark energy that spread from Abeni's hut. Every step Adewale took was a reminder of a life stolen. Every movement of his form was a memory of the lie his brother Temitope had woven. Every inch of the village now felt the weight of generations of injustice. Abeni crouched in the corner of her hut, clutching the charcoal. Her heart pounded, her knees shook. She could feel her grandfather's presence in every shadow, in every tremor, in every breath of wind that tore through the village streets. Her mother's warnings echoed in her mind. One day, you will understand why this charcoal is sacred. One day, the truth will demand a voice. This was that day. The houses nearest the hut cracked and splintered. The fire that began in the distant fields leapt closer, licking at the homes of villagers who had condemned her family without knowing the truth. The screams were loud, but Abeni barely noticed them. Her eyes were fixed on the figure that had stepped from the wall. Oba Adewale's spirit paused for a moment at the center of the village. The wind twisted around him. The very ground shivered. And then he continued, moving with unstoppable force, an avenger more fearsome than any army. Inside, Abeni realized something terrible. She could not hide. She could not flee. The power of the charcoal had called him here, but only she could stop him from destroying everything. She rose unsteadily, the weight of her bloodline settling on her shoulders. Every whispered insult, every stone thrown at her mother, every day of shame, all of it became fuel. She was not just a girl anymore. She was a descendant of a king, the keeper of the truth, the only one who could reach Oba Adewale and calm the storm he had become. Outside, Temitope's heirs and the current chief watched in horror. The village elders had built their lives on lies, but now those lies were walking, breathing, and returning in fury. The truth of Oba Adewale could not be silenced any longer. Abeni stepped into the center of the hut, drawing the charcoal across the wall again. Not to summon, but to focus. Her hand moved with purpose now, guided by something older than her, stronger than fear. The fire flared, the ground shook, and the villagers began to understand, finally, that the blood they had mocked, the family they had cursed, was not guilty. It was royal, it was wronged, and it was alive. Abeni stepped out of her hut into the chaos. Smoke curled around her like snakes, roofs groaned, trees snapped, and the villagers screamed as if the sky itself had fallen. Yet she moved forward, clutching the charcoal in her hand. Oba Adewale's spirit loomed before her in the village square. His eyes glowed like molten gold, and his presence pressed against the earth itself. He did not speak. He did not blink. He did not demand. Every step he took left the village trembling. Every breath carried centuries of fury. Abeni's legs shook, but she did not falter. The women of her bloodline had endured this shame for generations. The men and children of the village had cursed them for crimes they did not commit. And now, the truth demanded a voice. Her voice. She raised the charcoal and drew in the air, tracing lines she had never drawn before. The shape of a protective circle formed, glowing faintly, guided by instinct and by the centuries of power in her blood. The spirit paused. The wind stilled. Even the fires hesitated, as if sensing her authority. Her mind remembered the stories her mother had whispered before dying. One day the spirit will come, and only the one who carries our blood will hold him. You must be brave, Abeni. You must be the bridge between vengeance and peace. A warmth spread from her hands, flowing through the charcoal, and the lines she drew shimmered. Adewale's figure wavered for the first time, his fury colliding with recognition. The granddaughter he had never met, the one he had watched grow from afar, was here. Not to judge, not to apologize, to remember, to honor, and to guide. She could feel his pain, but it was not her own. She could feel the centuries of betrayal and lies, and she understood. The fire in his eyes was righteous anger, a keen sorrow twisted into fury because his legacy had been stolen. "Grandfather," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I'm here. I know the truth. I carry it with me." The spirit halted. The village around them seemed to hold its breath. For the first time, he looked, not with judgment, not with vengeance, but with recognition. Abeni stepped closer. Her movements were small, deliberate. She drew more lines, weaving them into the form of her family. The women who had endured, the mothers who had protected her. The charcoal glowed brighter with each stroke, as if the truth itself demanded light. And in that instant, the fires slowed. The walls that had cracked began to heal. The earth beneath them stopped quaking. The villagers stared, mouths open, witnessing a miracle they could not yet understand. Oba Adewale's eyes softened, the fury still there but restrained. A single silent acknowledgement passed between grandfather and granddaughter. She was the bridge, the keeper, the one who could end centuries of suffering. Abeni did not lower the charcoal. She held it steady, knowing that her bloodline, her courage, and her family's truth were the only things strong enough to calm a king's wrath. The village square was a storm of fire, smoke, and trembling earth. Roofs groaned as if mourning centuries of lies. Yet in the center, Abeni stood firm, charcoal in hand, eyes blazing with a clarity the villagers had never seen. Oba Adewale's spirit hovered, immense and silent, the weight of his rage pressing against everything. The villagers cowered, some screaming, some frozen in disbelief. None dared approach, yet all were watching the granddaughter of the traitors. Abeni raised her hand and began to draw again, not on the wall but in the air itself, the charcoal leaving glowing streaks that intertwined like threads of history. She traced her grandfather's face, her mother's, the women of her bloodline, and even the truth about the younger brother, Oba Temitope. The lines shimmered, forming images visible to all. Adewale, loyal and devoted, shielding the village from rival tribes. Temitope, whispering lies to elders, orchestrating the fall of his own brother. The funeral, staged as public grief, concealing the crime that condemned generations. The women of Adewale's line, shunned, cursed, forced into silence for crimes they did not commit. The villagers gasped, some fell to their knees, some covered their eyes, unable to reconcile the life they had believed with the truth they now saw. Abeni's voice carried over the chaos, steady, clear, unafraid. "This is the truth. My grandfather, Oba Adewale, was loyal. My family has never betrayed this village. Every insult, every stone, every curse thrown at us was born of lies. And now, the lies end. Oba Adewale's spirit moved closer. His presence pressed against the village, yet there was no aggression this time, only observation. He had come not for punishment, but for acknowledgement, and Abeni was delivering it. The fires around the square began to die down, smoke twisting into calm columns. The earth stopped trembling. The villagers could see the circle of glowing charcoal lines, weaving a story that could not be ignored. Elders who had praised Temitope in public now bowed their heads in shame. Mothers who had cursed her mother and grandmother now wept openly. The people began to murmur and then to speak the truth aloud, finally acknowledging the betrayal they had once celebrated. Abeni, still standing, felt the spirit behind her relax. A warmth spread through the glowing charcoal, binding the past to the present. Her bloodline, once hidden in shame, now carried authority. Her courage had begun to tame the fury of a king. The villagers, witnessing both the power of the spirit and the authority of Abeni, understood that this girl was no ordinary child. She was the granddaughter of the wronged king, the bridge between the living and the past, and the only hope to end centuries of suffering. Oba Adewale's spirit shifted, the gold of his eyes softening. The destruction he had brought now paused entirely. The fires shrank, the cracks in the walls of the village began to mend, and a silence fell that felt heavier than any scream. Abeni's voice broke it. Let this be the last time our people suffer from lies. Let this be the moment truth restores what was stolen. The villagers bowed in respect, finally seeing her family not as traitors, but as the bloodline of kings who had endured in silence. The truth carried through her hands and the sacred charcoal had begun to heal the centuries-old wounds. The wind had stopped. The smoke began to drift upward in soft spirals. Even the cracks in the earth seemed to hesitate, as if sensing a pause in the storm. Abeni stood at the center of the village, the charcoal glowing like a living heartbeat in her hand. Oba Adewale's spirit towered behind her, immense and golden-eyed, and yet, for the first time, he waited, not to strike, not to destroy, to be acknowledged. Her voice was steady, carrying across the square. Grandfather, I am your granddaughter. I carry your blood. I carry the truth they tried to bury. You are not forgotten. She drew again, carefully, slowly, tracing patterns in the air, weaving the line of her family's suffering into a circle of protection. The lines shimmered, bending the energy around the spirit, grounding his fury in recognition rather than vengeance. The villagers watched in awe. Mothers clutched their children. Elders whispered prayers. The fires had stopped spreading, yet the memory of their fear still hung in the air. Adewale's massive form wavered. The golden glow in his eyes softened. A low hum rose from his spirit, a sound that was neither voice nor roar, but the resonance of centuries of injustice being finally seen. Abeni took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every woman in her family who had endured shame, every insult they had received, every day the village had cursed them. All that pain transformed into power through her hands, her resolve, and the sacred charcoal. The spirit moved closer, towering, yet somehow diminished, controlled, not by fear, but by recognition. It was as though her presence reminded him why he had loved his people, why he had protected them, and why vengeance alone was never the answer. She spoke again, louder this time. Your truth is mine. Our family's legacy will no longer be hidden. Your fury does not have to burn this village. Let the past rest and let us guide the future. Oba Adewale's eyes lingered on her. Slowly, he began to fade, the massive golden form condensing into faint glowing lines. The wind sighed. The fires shrank. The cracks in the ground healed further. The villagers stepped forward cautiously, eyes wide with fear and respect. They no longer saw a child. They saw the granddaughter of the wronged king, the one who had faced the fury of a spirit older than memory, the one who had calmed him. Amini lowered the charcoal, exhausted but triumphant. She looked at the villagers, her chest heavy with the weight of centuries of pain, yet lighter for having carried it forward. A voice whispered through the square. One of the elders who had once cursed her mother. She carries the blood of kings. She is their queen. And in that moment, the title was no longer prophecy. It was recognition. Abeni had earned it, not by birth alone, but by courage, wisdom, and the strength to face a spirit that had consumed generations with its fury. Oba Adewale's spirit vanished completely into the air, leaving only warmth, peace, and a legacy reclaimed. The village had survived the night, but nothing would ever be the same. The bloodline of truth had returned, and its guardian now stood among them. The dawn broke over Ile Oba like a promise. Smoke still curled faintly from the outskirts, but the fires had burned themselves out, leaving only the smell of ash and renewal. Abeni stood in the center of the village square, her hand still gripping the charcoal, now dimmed and lifeless. She felt the weight of centuries of injustice lift from her shoulders. Her grandfather, Oba Adewale, had vanished into the air, leaving behind only the knowledge that truth had finally returned. The villagers emerged from their homes cautiously, eyes wide with awe. Mothers held their children tighter, elders bowed deeply, and men who had once scorned her family now lowered their heads in respect. Her mother's grave sat at the edge of the village, quiet and untouched by the chaos. Abeni approached it and placed her hand gently on the stone, whispering words only she could hear. We endured, we survived, and now the truth is ours again. The elders approached, hesitant, speaking with voices trembling from fear and reverence. You are the rightful queen, granddaughter of Oba Adewale. The bloodline of kings flows in you. The village owes its peace to your courage. Abeni looked at them, her eyes steady, knowing this was more than ceremony. It was justice. The women and men who had suffered silently, the daughters who had inherited shame, the sons who had grown under whispers of betrayal, all could now reclaim their place in the world. Temitope's legacy of lies lay exposed, crumbled under the power of truth. The village would no longer remember him as the benevolent chief who spared her family. They would know the story as it had really happened. Betrayal, deceit, and the endurance of a king wronged. Abeni lifted her chin. The villagers watched her with newfound reverence. The smoke cleared, sunlight fell on her face, and the winds carried away the last echoes of vengeance. She turned to the village and declared, her voice ringing with authority, "The past has been revealed. The lies that cursed my family are no more. From this day, Ileoba stands as a village of truth, justice, and honor, and I will serve as your queen." A silence fell. Then slowly the villagers cheered. Mothers wept openly. Elders nodded. Children clapped their hands in wonder. The shame that had haunted her bloodline for generations dissolved in the light of her courage. In her heart, Abeni felt the presence of Oba Adewale one last time. Not angry, not vengeful, proud. He had returned, seen his legacy, and finally passed it to the one capable of carrying it forward. She lowered her gaze to the charcoal, now quiet, inert, yet still sacred. It had served its purpose, a bridge between past and future, between vengeance and peace, between a grandfather and the granddaughter who had saved a village. Abeni turned to the villagers again, regal and calm. Her 16 years had forged wisdom beyond her age. She was beautiful, strong, and unyielding, the rightful queen. And in that moment, Ileoba understood. The traitors were never her family. The bloodline of kings had returned, and the village would never forget again